If you're sick of the mainstream sports outlets, well, so was I. So I started my own show. I'm Shane Larson, and this is the Game Time Guru. It's different than other talk shows. I'm providing a panoramic view on sports so you can see them through a different lens. So buckle up, and let's go. Guys, thanks so much for tuning into another episode of the Game Time Guru podcast, and I wanted to make mention that this episode is going to be in 3 different parts. So we're going to split it into 3 episodes because this is an extremely unique and extremely special opportunity for us to bring on a World Series winning pitcher to the show. This is Vern Law talking about his experience all the way from high school through the World Series and on. So he's from Meridian, Idaho. He's got a great story to share with us all, and it's going to go all the way from Meridian through his days with the Pittsburgh Pirates when he won the World Series in 1960 against the Yankees. So I hope you guys enjoy the episode. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Game Time Guru podcast. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and today I have the honor and privilege of speaking to the former Cy Young Award-winning, World Series-winning pitcher from the Pittsburgh Pirates, Mr. Vern Law. Vern, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to me this morning.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to talk about the game of baseball and what happened.
I'm honored to have you on the show, sir, and what's funny is I may not... people would think like I have nothing in common with you in regards to like athletic talent, like awards that you've won, stuff like that. But I do have something in common with you, and that's the fact that I'm from Meridian, Idaho, and to my understanding, so are you, and you have quite the history here in Meridian. So before we get started with like your professional career, we want to take it all the way back to when you were from Meridian and when baseball really wasn't that big. Could you explain that journey for us when you were in Meridian, Idaho?
Well, yes, Meridian back then was just a farming community. I played all the sports there in Meridian High School, and matter of fact, there was Moscow in Idaho, the university. They thought maybe I was a better football player than I was a baseball player, but I think I chose the right sport. To focus on, but that community, there was only about 1,500 people that lived in Meridian. I graduated from a class in '96, and all we had on our team were a bunch of big farmers. We did have a good football team and beat everybody in the state where we played, and so it was a very small community, and the livelihood, of course, was farming and cows. We had a dairy there in Meridian and a creamery, and so my brother and I we both worked there at the creamery. Matter of fact, most everybody close in town worked for the creamery, but as far as high school is concerned, it was quite small. We didn't have a lot of people to choose from, as far as the baseball team. And matter of fact, we had no coaching whatsoever. Anybody that knew anything about the game. Myself, I didn't. Because I lived on a farm, I was always throwing rocks at birds and insulators on telephone posts and one thing and another, and so I had a good arm. I could throw hard and I could throw strikes. I didn't even have a wind up. I knew nothing about pitching, how to set up a hitter or whatever. But as a matter of fact, after high school, I signed a professional contract there, and that's most interesting. And I think probably the reason, we were beating some of the big teams. My brother was my catcher, and so we worked well together. And as it turned out, we had tournament games at the end of of my junior year. And it was we were playing a team from Payette. That's Harmon Killebrew's hometown, but I was 4 years before Harmon, and so I didn't have to play against him at that point. But the game itself, my first manager that I had in the pros says, "Do you throw a changeup?" And I just said, "What's that?" I didn't know what a changeup was, but I did find out later, my second year, from a pitching coach that was managed in Davenport, Iowa, and he taught me how to throw that changeup. Well, I found that as a great weapon to use because I could strike a lot of people out with my fastball, but it really made pitching a lot easier for me to be able to set up a hitter. And there are some sins in baseball for a pitcher, and that was proven last night by the Dodgers in the World Series. You don't walk the first guy, and that run, that one of the ones that killed the Boston Red Sox last night, because he walked the first guy. 90% of the time, you walk that first guy, he's going to score. You might not lose the game, but you're going to score, So anyway, I learned a lot about pitching from that particular manager that I have. His name was Bill Burwell. But in high school, we just didn't have a good team, but we were winning because I was striking out, I'd say 90% of the hitters. And so, as it turned out, we won the district, we won this, at that point in time. But then we didn't have enough players. In my sophomore year, we had enough guys to have a post team, American Legion team, for the summer. And we did okay that particular year, but the next year, my junior year, we didn't have enough players. So what happened was I went to, along with two of my teammates who were pretty good players, we went and played on the Boise team, post 48 as I remember. And matter of fact, Larry Jackson, who also played in the big league, was on that team as a shortstop, but not as a pitcher. He later became a pitcher and did very well in playing for the Cardinals. But, we were good enough that we won the district, the state, the regional, and went to the sectional tournaments in Billings, Montana. And it was there that I met Babe Ruth. He was a guest speaker there. Well, actually, he didn't do much speaking because it's just after his throat operation, and he could just barely whisper. But I did get a baseball signed by Babe Ruth, and that, of course, kind of piqued my interest in the game. And so when I graduated in 1948, I had 9 different scouts that came to my home because they couldn't talk to me prior to the to even to my parents. There were certain rules back then that, the scouts had to abide by. But anyway, there were 9 different organizations represented there, including the Yankees and Dodgers and Cardinals and, all the teams that were kind of playing and looking for a new talent. But let me just explain, back up just a little bit, because in a game, one of the championship games there in Idaho.
So Vern, you said that you had these scouts that came to your house and you had 9 teams, but how did you get that professional exposure here in Idaho from a state that really didn't have, a strong, set of baseball teams and baseball schools and such? So how did you get that exposure in the first place? What happened in the game that got those scouts to come to your house?
We were playing in Payette, and it so happened that it was a good game. Nobody was scoring, but in the last inning, and I don't remember the sequence, either my brother got a double and I got a base hit to drive him in, or I hit the double and he drove him in. But we had a 1-0 lead in the 9th inning, the last inning. And so, as it turned out, they throw the ball around the infield. I take my warm-ups, and then, so my third baseman threw me the ball. I turned around, and up at the home plate was a midget. I can't tell you what a surprise that was to me, because I had hardly no target to throw to. But my brother came out and said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, he's up there to get a base on balls. I tell you what, you go get behind home plate, get on your knees, put the glove right down, on the ground, and by the time the ball comes over the home plate, why, it should be a strike." Well, and as it's fortunate, because I was used to throwing to a target, I threw 3 straight strikes and struck him out, and we ended up winning the game. Well, in the stands was an attorney, a very good friend of Bing Crosby's. Well, Bing and this fellow, Bing had bought interest in the Pirates, and so as it turned out, my friend, the attorney, he called Bing Crosby and says, "Hey, we got a suspect out here in Idaho. You better call the Pirates and tell him to come out and look at this kid, because he throws good, Well, like I say, I didn't even have a wind-up. I didn't even look like a pitcher, but I could throw strikes and I could throw hard. Well, that did get a lot of interest, because I had good control and I could throw strikes. So he did show up, and then, like I say, unbeknownst to me, I had no idea that all this was going on. And so when I graduated and all these people were at my home, but most of them came in smoking a big cigar. And my dad, being very staunch about this tobacco issue that was going on during those years, said, "Well, you can come in, but please, we don't allow tobacco in the house." So they didn't make too good of an impression. So, and now, the last people to come in was the Pirates. A fellow by the name of Babe Herman, who played in the outfield for the Dodgers, and so, and along with the attorney. But when they come in, they had a dozen roses and a box of chocolates for my mother. And then halfway through the conversation, the phone rings and the attorney says, "Mrs. Law, you better answer the phone." Well, on the other end of the line was Bing Crosby. Well, my mother liked to fainted, because she was such a great Bing Crosby fan. Well, everybody was, and so anyway, he gave my mother some good advice. He says, "Don't let your son sign for a bonus, because if you do sign over," and back then a bonus was over $5,000. If you sign for over $5,000, you're going to have to sit on a major league bench for 2 years before they can send you out, and learn how to pitch. And so he told, "Don't let your son sign for a bonus," and well, I did get a bonus, but it wasn't $5,000. It was $1,500 that I got for signing. And so, but that was more money than most of the farmers made in the year, so that was okay, and I thought it was wonderful. So to be paid to play baseball, that's a good job.
Absolutely, it's a good job. And you didn't necessarily just start in the majors, though. Can you explain the process, where you started once you signed, and kind of go through how you went through the ranks of baseball and the professional level, I should say?
Well, my first, like I said, they went ahead and signed, and of course now my second year. The first year I was just in a rookie league. This team had already started the season and so forth. I went there and finished up there that half year and did well, and won a few games. And then I went to Davenport, Iowa. This is where I learned how to pitch because of the pitching coach. And then the next year, I went to New Orleans, which was Double-A. And so I got off to a great start in New Orleans. Then I went to, on the road trip, I received a call from a traveling and says, "You're going to Pittsburgh." And, well, that was a shock to me, but I didn't, I kind of felt like I wanted to finish out the year there because I was having a great year, but they called me up to Pittsburgh. And, of course, from that point on, things really began to focus. I used a focus on how to really pitch and how, because I had a lot of coaches and a lot of help there. I picked up a lot by observing people and so forth, and so that was kind of the start of my career. But I found out later, after being in Pittsburgh for a year or two, and this was after the Dodgers had moved from Brooklyn down out to Los Angeles, and the Giants had moved to San Francisco from Brooklyn, and now we go out there, and every once in a while, Bing Crosby would show up at our ballpark and come down the clubhouse and say hi to everybody. Well, this particular day, I was pitching in Los Angeles, and Bing Crosby's in the clubhouse. Well, I went out, and I did my work and come back in, and we struck up a conversation. And he says, "Do you remember when you signed a contract?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I know who was there and so forth, but that's all I knew." He says, "Well, I want to tell you something. The Pirates went out and bought a box of cigars and passed them out before these scouts went in so that they wouldn't make too good of an impression." And so that's how come I ended up in Pittsburgh. So, okay, so that kind of gives you a little wind up as to what happened and how I got to Pittsburgh.
Oh, man, that's actually really funny that the Pirates organization did that, though, to try to win you and your family over. And it's really cool to hear, as you're explaining that story, a few things came to mind. I wrote them down. You mentioned multiple times that you didn't really have the proper coaching where you were from here in Meridian and such, because it wasn't too big of a thing here yet, and you still were able to make an impression on professional organizations, and that's really impressive because that's not something that everybody can do, especially without the proper coaching. So it's awesome to hear your journey, and then you also went through, obviously the minors up to the professional level. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you here, Vern, was about, okay, so you get into the majors, and to my understanding, you mentioned something because you grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where you guys observe Sundays as the Sabbath day. To my understanding, you had asked that you don't play games on Sundays. Is that correct?
Well, that happened early on, because they kind of honored that, and so. But now that I got started up in the classification and better baseball, I could see that this was going to cause a lot of problems because, if I didn't show up at the ballpark on Sunday and my teammates would say, "Well, where's Vern? He's supposed to pitch today," and so, I know the other guys on the team would not, well, they would like to have a day off too and go to church, and so forth.
Right.
And but that happened in the first 2 years, and then when I got to New Orleans, I could see that this was going to cause a problem, and so I talked to the general authorities about this, and I can remember our conversation with President McKay at that time. Why he says. Well, Mr. Law, he says, what did you do before you went, to the big leagues? And he says, I lived on the farm and we milked cows and we did all the things, farmers, kids did and so on. And so he says, was that your livelihood? And he says, well, yes, pretty much so. And he says, did you do this on Sunday? And he says, well, yes. And so he says, well, now you've signed a contract, haven't you, with Pittsburgh? And I said, well, yes, sir. And he says, well, you got to live up to your contract, Yeah, and I understand. I says, but let me give you some advice. I says, you do everything you can, to remain active, keep your nose clean, set the right example, and so forth. You'll be more than well accepted, and so live up to your commitments, and the Lord will bless you. Well, He certainly does, but because over the years I can see where, I can tell you one thing. I wanted success just as well as anyone else, in the game, and so that involved pitching on Sunday, and so I didn't like to lose on Sunday. I wanted to win on Sunday as well, and so I did give it my best. But I can honestly say that I had a problem with that. I didn't like to pitch on Sunday, but as it turned out, I went ahead and did the very best I could, and so it has all worked out. Matter of fact, I had one of the general authorities tell me, I won't tell you which one, but he says, when you were in the World Series and you pitched on Sunday, he says, if I hadn't had assignment, I wanted to stay home and watch the game. Anyway, by doing the things that I have been taught in my life, I know that my career would not have been as successful had I not had that kind of advice and help from the church. And I'll tell you, there are people that I have loved and respected, both in baseball and in the church. Has just been absolutely a wonderful experience for us and my family, because without it, like I say, my career would not have been as successful, because there's all kinds of trouble I could have got in had I not been a member of the church. And I'm grateful, and I can bear testimony to that fact, that it gave me to make right decisions in my life, as I went through all of this, so it was a tough learning experience at times, both in knowing how to say no when you should say no.
Do you have an example of that, Vern? Like when you said no, when, other people would have probably just gone along with it, but you stuck to your morals and said no?
I had a call during the World Series from New York. They called and wanted me to sign Marlboro cigarettes. And I was shocked by that. And I was stunned. I kind of stammered around, and I said, you mean you want me to sign, give you the okay to use my name and picture or whatever, to endorse Marlboro cigarettes? And yes, sir, we would like to do that. And I said, well, by that time I said, well, I can't do that, because I know that, the youth of the church looks up, to athletes, and whether it's in baseball or other sports, they look up to an athlete, and they expect to see people that, just like I did, when I saw Babe Ruth, he still had a cigar in his mouth, even though he had a throat operation, but he wasn't smoking it. It was just there to chew on, I guess. And he also had a bottle of beer that he was drinking. And that shocked me. And so he was not really a hero of mine, but was a great ball player. I didn't want to follow someone's example like that, but it just was really a big help to me to have the church backing and have people that I didn't realize at the time, but I had the biggest fan club in the world, because if they all the LDS people, of course, whether they were in the towns that I played, they always took care of me. If they would come to they'd come to the hotel, they'd pick me up, take me to church, and then they would get me to the ballpark in time to do what I had to do. And I can remember many times that in Cincinnati, and some of the times that even in Brooklyn and New York, when I was there, I went to church. I'd go to church, and then I'd have a cab waiting for me, to take me to the ballpark. So I made the extra effort to make sure that I, lived the standards of what I was taught in my life by my parents and also by the church.
Guys, that's going to wrap it up for part one of this episode 85 3-part episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to be looking for more, so part 2, stay tuned later on in the week. We're going to be launching part 2, which will explain the middle part of Vern's career, going through the minors to the majors, and he's going to talk about his experience in the draft for the Army and when he spent 2 years serving in the Army and how that affected him in his career. So make sure you go and give this 5 stars, leave me a review on iTunes, and share it with all your friends and family, and get ready for part 2.